Andyford Banda, Park President, thank you so much for joining me on this day.
Thank you very much, Jonah.
Today we're talking about Zambia's agriculture sector, and I believe that this is one of the major initiatives that the People's Alliance for Change focuses on, transformation to Zambia's economy. Why is that?
The reason why the People's Alliance for Change focuses on the agriculture sector is because if you look at the Zambia Statistics Agency report, Living Conditions of 2022, indicates that 78% of rural people are poor. There was an increase, in the number of poor people in the rural areas from 76% to 78%. And the main economic mainstay in the rural areas is small-scale farming. So the fact that the poverty levels are going up, then there's something that's not working out there. It is for this reason that the People's Alliance for Change PAC focuses on the agriculture sector. The next thing is the fact that about almost 60% of the Zambian population is employed in the agriculture sector or agricultural value chain. So if we do not get it right or we mess it up, we are going to lose a lot of people, from getting jobs. So it is very important, for us to actually ensure that we get it right, so that we don't start importing, things that we can produce locally. The manufacturing industry should not suffer from importing raw materials from outside the country if we don't get it right in the agriculture sector. So that's the reason why we focus on that.
How would you describe Zambia's agriculture sector over the past decades and where we are currently?
Zambia's agriculture sector has not been growing. Yet, you can hear governments, being proud of the number of tonnage of maize, for example, that's being produced, to say, okay, we have achieved this. I think that is, organic growth. It is driven by factors such as population growth, in those areas. It's not really driven by initiatives, to say the production of maize, for example, has gone up because we have created certain initiatives. Because if you look at agricultural policies from after independence, there's not much difference up to today. When Zambia got independence after 1964, the unique government adopted agricultural policies that were favorable to the white farmers, before independence, and they took them wholesale to the population. And that's the reason why one of the issues that brought in the economic crisis of in the 1970s was the fact that we were giving too many subsidies in the agriculture sector. So, and then at some point we stopped giving subsidies until about 2001, when President Manawasa introduced the Farmer Input Program, which later moved to Farmer Input Support Program. But you can see that the policies of the 1964 and the current policies, there's not much difference. Because ideally, these support programs were not to make farmers be perpetually on them. They were supposed to be graduating so that they can eventually stand on their own, because they're not sustainable. Populations are growing. How do you expect to continue supporting a growing population of farmers when you're not generating enough revenue? So the only way to sustain them is to come up with a system that ensures that farmers become independent, so that some of them, they start falling off of these input programs. So in a nutshell, to answer your question, we have not gotten it right, in terms of the agriculture sector.
Have we not gotten it right, or it's the people themselves? Because government does spend this money on these farmers, spend it so much that the farmers have actually become dependent on it. But the farmers, surely, when given this capital, if I may call it that, should be able to sustain themselves after that, because the money would have already been given to them and the inputs would have been given to them.
I think the idea of just giving capital to farmers is not the only thing that should be done in the agriculture sector. I think there are many lessons that we can learn. For example, one of the models that we have not copied from, which President Manawasa, when he came up with the initiative of, these, what do you call these, these areas that are put around
The farming blocks.
Farming blocks, correct. When he came up with the idea of the farming blocks, he was trying to copy the model that Zambia Sugar works with Kalea Smallholder Company, to ensure that farmers are given the right support for them to succeed. So just giving them inputs is not enough. They need training, they need support, they need a reliable market. So there are various structures that have not been implemented to ensure that the farmers become independent. But also, we're living in a time of climate change. Just giving them inputs and expect them to be on get into rain-fed agricultural activities is not enough. Right now, it's time to get into irrigation farming so that they can also crop diversify and maybe even have multiple planting seasons in a year, which we are not doing enough on a scale that this agriculture sector is expecting. So it is not just the farmers, it is the structures that are there today that are not helping the farmers.
Is it right to argue that the structure should focus then on the commercial farmers as opposed to focusing on the subsistence farmers? Because the commercial farmers, if we're to go the route of Zambia Sugar, for example, and Kalia smallholder, the commercial farmer is the key of that area, empowering those subsistence farmers.
Well, I mean, if you look at the Kalia smallholder structure, the commercial farmer is not the key.
It is the key funder.
Is a key funder, just like the government can be the key funder, for the small scale farmers. So the Zambia Sugar is a key funder, is a key, a driver, for the Kalia smallholders, small scale farmers. Now, when you talk about focusing on the commercial farmers, we are just going back to the history of colonialism in terms of how our agriculture sector was distorted. Because when you talk, it is easy for the commercial farmers, for example, to engage in agricultural activities because they are in areas which have got infrastructure. They've got roads, they've got fertile lands, and this is as a result of the segregation that happened from colonial times. It comes from way back. It doesn't come from now. So as a result of the distortion that was caused by the colonial government, it is for this reason that small-scale farmers have lagged behind. There's no infrastructure, they don't have roads, they don't get the support that they need. A lot of farmers, commercial farmers have got, titles, they already get loans from the banks, while small-scale farmers are not getting loans from the banks. So if we want to really revolutionize the agriculture sector, we need to go back to history and look at the impact of colonialism on our agriculture sector. Why are we still dependent on imported goods and products, in the agriculture sector? Once we learn that, then we have to take drastic steps to ensure that we reverse that and come up with policies that can actually help the small-scale farmers. What is the point of focusing on commercial farmers? What will the small-scale farmers be doing? Are they going to be dependent on FISIP, on social cash transfer? That is not sustainable. So we need to get it right. And we as PAC, we have ideas and ways on how we can get it right so that the small-scale farmers can become productive, they can become successful, and they can actually also start having opportunities like the commercial farmers have.
Within your understanding of all of this and the research that you've done, the assessment that you've done, in your view, what is the single most important factor that is going to save Zambia's agriculture sector?
Drastic reforms in the agriculture sector. If you look at successive governments, of course, under the MMD in the 1990s, there were new reforms that they brought in to try and revitalize the agriculture sector. But from that time up to today, each and every government that comes in just sustains the same systems without actually looking at what the problem is and coming up with solutions that would make it work. From the time that FRI was introduced in the 1990s and revised a bit, I think in 2005, it's still the same FRI. This FISIP, has FISIP worked? We need to ask questions. Has FISIP worked? Because if FISIP has worked, why is it that rural poverty is going up? But if we want to form government, we just want to talk about let's maintain FISIP in the structure that it is, and they will do it better, will not be stealing money for fertilizer, will not be stealing money for imports. That's the politician's language. But there's no politician that is brave enough to say, we need to bring in radical reforms.
What are these radical reforms? Let's hear them then.
To start with, like I mentioned, let me start from the fact that the biggest driver of the small-scale farmers is the Farmer Input Support Program. But we need to ask ourselves questions. Has it worked?
Well, it has been able to meet the targets of the Food Reserve Agency over the years.
But the question, Jonah,
and maintaining food security of the country.
The fact that the poverty levels are going up in the rural areas, and if you go to the rural areas today, you will see the poverty there. So it means that the idea is not just for the farmers in the rural areas to produce food for you and me, Jonah, who live in town, to buy meal meal at a cheaper price. Because when meal meal is expensive, the people that complain is not the farmers, it's you and me. So it's like we have created this system of the rural farmers to produce food for the town dwellers so that they can have it cheaper.
That's one way to look at it, but the truth is they are in business because they're not giving you this maize for you to make the meal meal. They're actually selling it to you.
They're selling to us. Are they making a profit?
On top of the fact that they don't spend on the inputs. The inputs are subsidized by government, and then they sell this maize to the government or to private buyers and make a profit off of it.
Okay, so now let's come back to the reforms that we need to do. First of all, I'll come back to the statistics. Poverty levels are going up. Is that what we want as a country? What is the agriculture sector? What must it achieve? I think for PAC, agriculture must actually achieve prosperity for the small-scale farmers. It should not just be a vehicle that is used to produce maize so that people in town can have cheap maize. For all we care, we can actually tell the people in the rural areas not to sell food to the urban areas. So
then they won't have money.
No, they want money, but they can export it so that they can make more money. So we need to create a system that makes them to prosper. So now, FISIP has not worked because the poverty levels are going up in the rural areas. Next, if you look at the budget of 2020, because I was listening, from the government side of things, where they're proud that they have managed to produce 3.7 million tons of maize, on the 2024-2025 farming season. But if you look at the 2020-2021 farming season, the government, the PF government produced about 3.6 million tons. They invested about 5.4 billion kwacha, targeting about 1 million farmers. And then the UPND government, produced 3.7 million, invested about 8.8 billion kwacha, targeting 1 million farmers. So you can see the discrepancy, that there's something that is amiss. So now what we need to do...
Something that could be inflation.
But if you look at the exchange rate of 2020 and 2021, we might see that the difference is not much. The budget is too way high. Now, what we need to do is that we also need to look at the production of the farmers in the rural areas. How much are they producing per hectare? You find that rural farmers are producing less than 5 tons per hectare, when a commercial farmer is producing 10 tons per hectare. So, to revolutionize the agriculture sector, for us as PAC, we believe that something needs to be done. There's one thing that the UPND has done right. They have introduced a sustainable agriculture financing facility. However, the scale of it is too small. In the 2023-2024 farming season, they supported about 4,300 farmers. Then in the 2024-2025 farming season, they supported about 9,000 farmers. Now, when you look at the number of farmers that are supposed to support or need their support, if we just go with the numbers that have been on the e-voucher, there are about 730,000 farmers on e-voucher today. So you can imagine if today we are supporting 9,000 farmers, giving them the proper equipment such as irrigation and other things that they need, when are we going to get to 730,000 or 1 million farmers?
Are we saying that all these 1 million farmers need the facility?
At least half need the facility, or even 3/4 need the facility. And for us to actually break off from the colonial system, the distortion by the colonial time, the colonial, the colonial distortion in the agriculture sector, we need to do something drastic. What are we supposed to do? Number one, for us, we believe that it starts with FRA. I don't think FRA should continue to be buying maize from the farmers. FRA must become a producer together with the farmers instead of waiting for the farmers to actually produce. Now, FRA can copy the Kalea smallholder company model where they become the Kalea smallholders, and then they work with small-scale farmers as outgrowers, and then they are supported because FRA has got depots and staffs across. So now, instead of having these staff that are just looking for where's the maize, they need to have, agriculture support staff who can be supporting small-scale farmers to be able to give them, training on better farming methods, to help them, with water harvesting and many other support that they need, just like the Kalea smallholders. Now, when we start doing that and training these farmers and then giving them the support, so even the funds that are supposed to be invested, such as a Sustainable Agriculture Financing Facility, should be invested through FRA, so that FRA must administer those funds. So what we need is to restructure an organization like FRA, so that instead of it just waiting, for the farming season to buy, which they're failing to buy the maize as we speak, they should get into the nitty-gritty of producing, getting exactly the Kalea smallholder farmers model. It's not just FRA. You heard, I think that was in last year, when ZNS, launched a number of business, initiatives that they want to get into, whether it's security, whether it is block making, and it is why they're wasting time. Zambia National Service core business is producing food, apart from the security aspect. What they should do is that focus on food production. Now, how can they enhance their food production? They can enhance their food production as well by getting the Kalea smallholders model and working with small-scale farmers, giving them support in those rural areas. You have ZNS is in rural areas already. You have ZNS in Mtetezi and Katete. You have ZNS in big concession in Mumbwa there, which is in the midst of the villages, surrounded by villages. So what we need to do is to come up with a chicken egg structure where ZNS, FRA are the chickens and the eggs are the small-scale farmers, and then they are given support so that they can produce. So the point I'm trying to drive, Jonah, is that this is not a comprehensive idea, but this is an idea that should be floated, that the park will pursue and be perfected together with the technocrats that are in government, and other people that have got experience. But if we want to break off, from the distortion, of the agriculture, the distortion that happened in the agriculture sector from the colonial times, we have to do that. You must remember that before colonial times, Africa was dependent mainly on the agriculture sector. The reason why there's food crises in Africa is because the colonialists distorted our way of living. They took land from the African people, and sent them to go and work in the mining areas where they were mining, and they stopped producing. That's why, they stopped them from doing the work that they were doing. After that, it was distorted. When they were building roads, they were not building roads to improve rural people. Because when we talk about Zambians, we're not just talking about Zambians that live along the line of rail. We are talking about Zambians that live in Chadiza, that live in Shangombo. There's no line of rail there. That live in Zambezi, in Northwestern. There is no line of rail there. What we need is to restructure and get back to how we used to live. And that's when we're going to see prosperity. Because once we empower the farmers and they're able to have multiple incomes, this is when the government will not even need to introduce new taxes, because there'll be a big buying power in the economy, which will be able to support the manufacturing industries and many other goods, and they'll be able to collect a lot of taxes.
Would you say that Zambia's liberalized agricultural policy is real altogether?
Would I say that the Zambia liberalized agriculture policy is real? I really don't think that the agriculture policy in Zambia is liberalized. I think there's so much control from the government. There's so much control from the government, which is something that we as PAC want to detach, from the government buying maize, buying inputs, contracting fertilizer supplies and stuff like that. The government wants to keep control. And the reason why the government is sustained that kind of system is because of corruption and patronage. They want farmers, who are most of the majority voters, to be dependent on this government policy, where they are the ones that control everything.
You don't think that the reasoning behind government is a lesson? You don't think that the reasoning behind government is a lesson from the past, when Zambia struggled with maize supply, for example, that they had to start importing maize or begging for maize from other countries, and that's the reason why government insists on having a measure of control on the farming of this commodity?
That's why we're saying that to guarantee ourselves of maize stocks, what we need to do is to restructure the FRA. So if the FRA is involved in producing and they're collecting from production, then we'll have guaranteed stocks. Then the maize sector can now finally be liberalized, because the FRA will agree with Jonah. Jonah, we've got 2 hectares. We're going to get 50% of the 2 hectares and we'll keep. So they'll calculate by how many do we need for us to get our stocks. Maybe we need about 100,000 farmers. Then the rest can sell to Malawi, to Angola and everywhere. Then the maize market is liberalized. Then FRA doesn't need to set the prices. And then that's when we're going to see, the farmers, becoming successful and prosper in what they're doing.
Is there a need for us to balance? Is there even a balance anyway between the commercial agriculture and the smallholder farmers? Because we've also heard the commercial farmers who feel like government is focusing so much on subsistence farming, and yet commercial farming is what's holding together the commercial side of agriculture in the country.
The fact that the commercial farmers are holding the commercial side of the agriculture sector is a problem. That's the reason why I ask, well done to the government. Last year we produced 1.7 million tons of maize. Of course, we had the drought in the 2023-2024 farming season, but the fact that they improved to 3.7 million, it's a good step. But however, the question is that who was producing the 3.7 million? Was it the small-scale farmers, or it was the commercial farmers? The commercial farmers should not hold the agriculture sector. It should be all the small-scale farmers. That should be the target of the government. Actually, the commercial farmers and many other powerful associations, whether it's Farmers Union and others, they have been driving a lot of government policies which have been favoring them more than the small-scale farmers. So are we supposed to balance? I don't think it's a question that we should be answering, because it's not balanced already. When the commercial farmers are complaining that it's not balanced, I don't understand, because they are living well, but rural people are living in poverty. The commercial farmers are focused on making substantial profits, and yet their friends in the rural areas are not making anything. So it's not balanced already. What we need to do is to actually restructure the investment that goes in the rural areas, and make it more worthwhile than what we are doing today. If you look at the budget, for example, this year, the government is borrowing about 21 billion from domestic banks. That's about $900 million. Imagine if we can actually invest half of that in the agriculture sector to make sure that the farmers have got all the equipment. And this is not like we're giving them for free. If we put in structures, we could recover this money within 3 years, or at the most, and we come up with a proper recovery program, so that if we invest $500 million this year in the agriculture sector, we target that in the next 3 years, this money must come back and benefit other people. Within 10 years, we can completely revolutionize the agriculture sector, and we can balance it up now between the commercial farmers and the rural farmers.
Isn't there a context that the reason why government subsidizes these farmers to the extent that they do is also the reality that Zambia is a highly impoverished country. There's a lot of people living in poverty, and the best way to get them out of poverty is to subsidize their well-being.
Well, that is the same idea that we started with after independence in 1964. You must remember that before 1964, the indigenous black farmers were not subsidized, by the colonial government. And that's why one of the reasons why African governments were fighting for independence, because after independence they said, you know what, if you want to have farming inputs, fertilizers and everything, you need to fight for your freedom so that you can get these benefits. And after independence, all the commercial farmers and the colonial government programs were sustainable because they were looking at a small scale. After independence, the scale was massive. And by 1972, going to 78, there was an economic crisis. Now, at some point, the subsidies went off. The government used to subsidize maize and stuff like that. Then the introduction of farmer support program by President Mwanawasa was actually necessitated by the fact that Zambia had attained the HIPI completion point, the highly indebted poor countries completion point. So because they didn't need to pay any debt, they had excess money to actually start programs like the farmer support program. Now, it's been 25 years and we don't have farmers that we can point and say that from the time that the farmer support program started, they have been able to stand on their own. So the point I'm trying to drive is that the idea of these subsidies is not because we're poor. The original idea was to actually help farmers to give them a head start, and then within 3-4 years they must be standing on their own. But because of politics and patronage and corruption, we have not been able to achieve that. So in the long run, right now as we speak, the government is actually accumulating about $1 billion of debt every year. The UPND government, from the time they came up to now, they've been able to accumulate about $4 billion every year. And part of the reason is because we are increasing the subsidies that we're giving to the farmers. Now, this should tell you, Jonah, that it's not sustainable. This idea that, we are poor, so let's keep sustaining. We'll go back to 1978 when there was an economic crisis in Zambia and many other African countries, which led to all these shortages that we had in the 1980s, which culminated, in the change from the one-party state, to multi-party democracy. So the populations are growing. You must remember that at independence, the population was 3.5 million. By the time the crisis was happening in the 1970s, the population was about 6 million. Now the population is 20 million. In the next few years, populations are still going to grow. So the idea that we should be thinking that let's keep subsidizing because we're a poor country, that is not going to help us. What we need is to restructure these programs and ensure that we start graduating as many farmers as possible before it is too late.
To what extent has climate change affected agricultural productivity and output in Zambia?
To a great extent. I think the best example was last year, where we actually produced about 1.7 million tons of maize. We had hunger. The government had to introduce a lot of social programs to actually just sustain people, especially those that depend on agriculture. We could see the food prices were up in terms of maize. So that is an example. It's unfortunate that this is not the first time that we've had a huge crisis in terms of the climate situation. We had it in the 2014-2015 farming season, but we couldn't learn from there. If you look at the agricultural policy of PF of 2016, is it 2016? Yes, you find that everything that's supposed to be done is in that policy. But it was not done. We need to put in irrigation, we need to do this and this and that. But because of corruption, because of patronage, we are not doing the right thing. So climate change, if we don't put in the right policies, if we don't support the farmers with the right equipment, irrigation equipment, we're going to cry. And it will be worse because the populations have grown, and it's going to be worse because we don't know what can hit us, in the near future. So climate change has really affected us. The food production has gone down, and farmers need more equipment and many inputs. On the other hand, we are happy that there's for example, United Capital Fertilizer that is opening up factories around. But we also need to be aware that we need to start looking seriously at the fact that various soils across the country do not conform to the same fertilizer. So we cannot be producing a uniform fertilizer. We need to start now studying this fertilizer, these soils, and producing the appropriate fertilizer that can help us produce more food. So we have to do the right thing. Otherwise, if we don't do the right thing, we will not be able to produce enough food for our country, and we'll start importing, which will take our inflation up, and the cost of commodity will go up.
With the issue around climate change becoming an active part of the conversation, and Zambians obviously live this as a reality, should this also be one of the things government is deliberately working with the farmers on to ensure that we escape the effects of climate change?
Yes, and that's why we need to restructure how governments engages with the farmers, and that's the reason why I mentioned earlier to say that ZNS and the Food Reserve Agency must restructure, must start working with small-scale farmers as outgrowers, and part of the program that they should do in this outgrow program is to prepare the small-scale farmers for this climate change challenges. For example, we don't have a lot of water harvesting mechanisms across the country, and yet Zambia receives a lot of rainfalls, which is just wasted. If I'm not mistaken, about 160 billion cubic liters of rains is received, and we don't even harvest 30% of that rain. So we waste a lot of water. If ZNS and FRA can be restructured, they can come up even with the simple facilities for various farmers to be able to harvest water in preparation for climate change, as we go. So yes, it is important that government must engage the farmers on this issue, and to do that effectively, they must restructure how they engage. Let us give this responsibility to ZNS and FRA.
Let us talk about the strengthening of long-term strategic planning for the agriculture sector. A lot of the things that are talked about from a seasonal basis. The rain season, which we are very dependent on,
the campaign basis
is around the corner, and based on that, government implements initiatives to support that specific rain season. What are some of the best policies that government can consider for long-term planning to strengthen the agriculture sector and commercialize the agriculture sector?
Exactly. Actually, that was supposed to be my first answer. The first answer really, to come up with long-term planning is to commercialize the agriculture sector. What we have done with the agriculture sector is that we have treated it as a social sector. It's like we're just helping people, to get by. But if we can actually make farmers appreciate the business side of the agriculture sector, we are going to see a lot of productivity there, and there will be long-term plans, and certain plans will actually be they'll come in on their own, because people will now see to say, if we work hard and we do these things, we're going to make money. They'll see their friends making money and all those kind of things. So the best way to actually come up with policies is to make farming a business, to remove it from the social programs, to make it a business. If we give farming inputs and equipment to farmers, it must be a loan, which must be recovered. However, like we mentioned earlier, we must actually put in a structure to help the farmers, be stable, so that we are able to recover that loan. But what we do, because we treat this as a social program, we just give out, and we don't care whether the farmers are going to use the inputs on their land or they're going to sell them. We don't put in mechanism to ensure that the intended purpose of this farming input is achieved. Of course, the government has been trying to control this, through the introduction of the e-voucher program, because before the e-voucher program, a lot of ghost farmers were on the system, and there were other people who were taking advantage of the leakages, by ensuring that they get cards from the e-voucher cards, from, I mean, they collect inputs on behalf of other farmers because they could just afford to deposit the 400, So what we need to do is to strengthen those systems and ensure that the leakages are not there for us to be able to be sustainable.
Is it easy to commercialize the agriculture sector in Zambia, especially by the small-scale farmers, given the fact that the output we are consistently talking about is maize? And it's very important to Zambia, very important resource to Zambia because it's the staple food. And an export of this is also very, very delicate and is important to keep in check. With these dynamics surrounding these small-scale farmers, is it feasible to commercialize?
I think it is feasible. We believe it is feasible. The only thing is that we have not tried it. The only thing is that there's no government that we can point at, Jonah, that said, now agriculture is going to be a business.
This government is saying that.
Over the years, I mean, talking and putting in policies, corresponding policies to rhetoric is important. Over the years, I give this example. I've worked in the DRC myself. I worked in Kinshasa. At some point, we used to buy cabbage for $14, one head of cabbage, and obviously, mini meal was quite expensive at some point. And these people, they need the mini meal, they need the maize. In the past, we used to produce more copper than than DRC, but now they've surpassed us. So we have let this market, sleeping. Very soon, this market will now be selling maize to us because we have not taken advantage of that. You saw recently that the new president of Malawi, was speaking with President HH, and he was requesting for Zambia to export 200,000 metric tons of maize. So we have the market. So the fact that the market is there, not just in Zambia. Zambia already on its own is a big market, but we also have markets around the region, South Africa, and many other areas. The commercialization of the agriculture sector is possible, but we need to have political will. We need to have reforms, for this to be achieved. We need to have, pilot projects. We need to actualize President Monalsa's dream of the farming. What do you call them? The initiative by the farming blocks. Every year in the budget, you hear, no, we have released this money to build this road and what. We need to be aggressive about these things if we want to achieve results.
How do we move away from maize? Let's talk about moving away from maize. And when you look at history, crops do die out, crops do become extinct. The climate does change, changing the shift of direction towards what people will eat. How do we slowly start moving away from maize?
The way we start slowly moving on from maize is to encourage farmers to actually to mix crops as they are growing, whether it's cassava or any other during this farming season, or whether it is a fiumbu, or it's potatoes. But all that, Jonah, we need to have a governance system that can actualize that. The farmers need training. We are not going to achieve these things, Jonah, by just talking about them. Structures must be operational. Things must be working. The ground must be feeling these things working. That is how we are going to achieve these things. Because if the farmers have to crop diversify from maize to cassava or potatoes or rice or any other, we have to train them. We have to teach them. They have been doing maize for all these years. Now for them to move from that and transition, to other crops, we have to train them. So the structures must be put in place. And those structures at the moment are not in place. So we need to employ, the way the government is employing 30,000 teachers, 40,000, whatever, we have to also get massive employment of support staff, that can actually be on the case of farmers to train them to start, moving from these crops to these other crops. I think that is how we're going to achieve it.
We consistently hear the issue of pricing, and you did bring it up also when it comes to maize, and this is something that farmers talk about every time it is time to sell their produce. How do we ensure that there is a system that works with regards to the pricing mechanism of crops?
If we're going to allow FRI to produce and secure, the food through production, I don't think we have to worry about pricing. I think the best way, once the structures are in place, is for the prices to be dictated by the market demands. So if there's a lot of production, the prices go down. If there's a low production, the prices go up. It's time for the farmers, to benefit, just like in the copper industry. As we speak, because of energy transition, there's so much demand for copper, and the prices of copper will keep going up. So that is what should happen in the agriculture sector. Why should we suppress pricing when the farmers actually have an opportunity to make more? So with PAC, we believe that 10 years of PAC, by the time we're done, the pricing of maize should be liberalized. It should be dictated by the market.
The final part of our interview is for us to talk about mechanization. It is capital intensive to set up mechanization, manufacturing plants, and everything in between, as well as adoption of technology that will revitalize Zambia's agriculture. The real question is, how will we do this?
The way we should do it is that we need to reform, the whole value chain. Right now, as we speak, small-scale farmers cannot access, loans because they don't have, collateral or security, to give in to the banks because their land is under customary law. Commercial farmers are able to get loans and they're able to mechanize their farms. So the question we need to ask ourselves is that how do we enable the small-scale farmers to mechanize, with the land they have, which is customary? Do we have to go on a massive, title giving, to all these, small-scale farmers? And what conversation must we have with traditional leaders to enable that to happen? Because if we're going to just say no, because the land belongs to the chiefs, is that what's going to help this country? Or should we actually reform, the land policy and ensure that as many farmers as possible, actually get, titles? On the other hand, we can say, if we're going to bring in FRNs, ZNS, to be the big people and to work with small-scale farmers as outgrowers, should the government actually guarantee them borrowing from the banks so that they can take the money and take it? This is under restructured systems. It's not like now, if that's the case, then we have to restructure and come up with the departments that look at giving out, this equipment and loans to the farmers and the recovery. And then departments that are given targets, make sure that the targets set are achieved. That's what we're going to do. But if one mechanize, Jonah, we've been speaking about climate change. And without mechanization, without reforms, we are not going to beat this climate change. We need to mechanize so that we can, beat the climate change. We can also increase production. On the other side of the manufacturing sector, I think the manufacturing sector really is ready. And one of the things that they complain is that they have to import a lot of things that we can produce if the government policy on the agriculture sector is correct. But they are forced to go and import these things from out of the country because we are not able to produce. So for now, we don't have to worry about the manufacturing sector. I think what we need to worry on is on the production aspect.
Thank you so much for joining us on this edition.
Thank you very much for inviting us, and good day.